Hello and welcome back to Season 7 of Vermont Film Essentials. My name is David Metzger,
I'm Devon Ewalt.
and with us today we have a guest.
My name's Melo Grant.
Thank
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great
Thank
to
you
have
for being here. She has chosen for us the great 1967 crime thriller In the Heat of the Night. So I guess we'll just start off, why did you choose this film?
I love this movie. I have been watching this movie all my life. And it's been interesting for me because I was initially drawn to it when I was younger because of Sidney Poitier. Incredible character, very, for a black man at that time to have that kind of role. And then, of course, I'm sure we'll get to the slap heard across the country later on. It was, it was a very powerful movie. So I just remember my father in particular, he really liked the movie a lot. And there were just certain things you would just wait for. But as I grew older, and I was born in 1964, so I've seen some things. So as I grew older, and I grew up in New York City, but my family was from Nashville, Tennessee, so I spent a lot of time down south, Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama. So I'm very much aware of the tensions that were very, very strong still in the 70s, early 80s now. And the movie really, when you think about when it was made and what was going on in the country at the time, when you look back at it from a historical standpoint, there were just so many milestones in the film. And then there's just, it's filmed beautifully. It has really stood the test of time. The soundtrack, Quincy Jones. And just the performances are outstanding. I remember saying to myself once, I was watching Cool Hand Luke, Paul Newman, need a moment. I was like, why didn't Paul Newman win the Oscar for this? Who won the Oscar that year? Oh, Rod Steiger won the Oscar.
I was gonna bring that up because we're talking about 1967 and 1967 in American film, and if you just look up the Academy Awards from 1968 to honor 1967, it's like Cool Hand Luke, Bonnie and Clyde, In the Heat of the Night, Graduate. I mean, it's just a crazy year, and I think it speaks to the strength of this film that in any other time you would look at a year like that and be like, how did In the Heat of the Night win over those movies? But then you look at it and you're like, nope, it totally earned and deserves to win. I'm ashamed to admit that it was one of those movies that always slipped through the cracks and I had never seen it. And I can't even really tell you why. It's just I always kind of thought that, oh, it'll be on TCM or it'll fall into my lap and I'll just watch it. So thank you for making this film fall into my lap.
Excellent.
Because watching it and as it is just damn fine, high class filmmaking.
It really is.
It's so well made.
There's so many nuances, especially in the performances.
Oh, absolutely. What struck me was how economically it's made, of like the choices, the editing choices. It's put together in such a great way. I saw it in my early 20s and I thought it was great, but I hadn't really cultivated my kind of cinematic, being able to really assess a film, and it really is so well put together, and there's all these little symbolic, there's all kinds of symbolism used throughout it too, I thought.
Absolutely.
The color red is throughout the film. I must have written down 10 things that were red, from the Coke machine outside the police station to the sign that said police, and there's all these symbolic truths that you can get from the color red that can be applied to the story and the forces that are kind of down there. It's
definitely. And I thought I had stumbled across something recently. I went down a YouTube rabbit hole. I was looking for information. I just read an article on the Quincy Jones documentary. that his daughters recently did.
Gotta watch that.
And I went on YouTube looking for a trailer and seeing if there were any, scenes. Then all of a sudden on the side, there was Quincy Jones talking about In the Heat of the Night soundtrack. And so I went over there, and then it also had the cinematographers talking. It was older footage.
Yep.
And they were so bitter they didn't have a crane. They talked about that repeat. We didn't have a crane, so we had to do this. We didn't have a crane, so we had to do that. We didn't have a crane. And I liked the way they, well, of course, Quincy talks about the fact there was the blues and the jazz, and how that was also a departure from what was going on in filmmaking. And my father played saxophones, but my father also, he had like a little bitty saxophone, he had a huge saxophone and everything in between, but he also played flute. And the flute is used wonderfully in that movie. It's used really during some tense scenes. But one of the things the cinematographers talked about was moving their cameras to the beat. So there's a scene where Gillespie is driving across the bridge when they're going after that character, Harvey.
I took a note on it of how much that music elevated that scene, or it just, even like what you're talking about, where it's actually being synced.
Exactly. So when the camera's moving in on Gillespie, it's to 4 beats.
So cool.
So there's all this other aspects of the movie, and then coordinating some of the camera work with of how the soundtrack was going to sound. So I don't know how much of like Quincy had done in advance, but they definitely had coordinated some of those scenes. And so when they talked about those specific scenes, I was like, I've seen this movie how many times?
You know it so well.
I never noticed that, but when I go, I'm counting 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, as the camera closes into Gillespie driving in that car. So it was definitely very interesting. I think also the music spoke to the time, to the South, and just what was happening in the country in terms of just Black culture getting out there. Back then it wasn't African American. It was still coming off of Negro, moving over to Black. When I was growing up, we were fine with Black. It was just, don't call us the other N-word, and then now it's African American. But Black culture at that time, that soundtrack also represented that as well.
That's why I think that what's so crazy about the film is that there's so many of these disparate elements where, so Haskell Wexler is the cinematographer, and this is coming at a time when it's a very experimental time, and you got these cinematographers like Haskell Wexler and Laszlo Kovacs, and
they had no crane.
They had no crane, but he is not afraid to move the camera to do all of these crazy, untraditional things. You have Quincy Jones, who is not making your average movie soundtrack, at least not up to that point. You have Sidney Poitier, who recognizes what this role is and plays it in such a way that he's like, we can talk about the slap, where he's like, okay, I'm only doing this scene if you promise me that you don't cut it out, that you don't play it, that he slaps me and I just take it. You have Rod Steiger, who is deep into the method Brando acting, and none of them, their performances are so great because they're each playing their own characters, and their own style of acting is just that, it's such a way that it's just like, I'm not giving you an inch. In any of these scenes, I'm not giving you an inch. I'm not placating to you. You're not going to placate to me. And that plays out so beautifully.
Which didn't make it feel like
the
performances.
Right.
It just felt like these the reality of.
When you look at Rob Steiger, when you hear him as himself talking and speaking, and then you look at Gillespie.
It's Gillespie. It's not Steiger. Yeah,
exactly.
He truly becomes
he
this.
transformed.
Yeah.
The accent.
His moment-to-moment acting too, I'm just a huge fan of, because it is that Brando style of, it feels real. It doesn't feel like you memorized lines. It feels like the actual reasoning that happens from moment to moment in a human brain,
Exactly.
in a moment, and
His
it's
facial expressions.
yes, he's living each moment.
He's living
Yeah.
each moment, and
Yes.
and the accent, the gum chewing,
Gum chewing.
the
Oh,
gum chewing.
I think it speaks volumes. Warren Oates' casting in this, because Warren Oates is an actor who starred in multiple cult favorite movies in the 70s and became his own leading, kind of indie leading man to a point. And the fact that it felt like by casting such a strong actor in the Sam Wood character, it just really felt, it made it feel more real to have an actor of that quality in a character like that may not be one of the larger ones, but his character sort of goes through a character arc where he's trying to figure out things, and it's like, I think it was a very well cast film.
Yeah, he goes from grabbing the first black eye he sees on his own.
Exactly. He calls him Verge at one point, but and granted, I was like, well, he's trying to save his own, he's trying to save himself, but he does see him in a different light now,
He
and
sees
he has
him a
been
different
forced to.
because he's become a suspect. So now he knows what that's like. He's an innocent man who's now become a suspect, who's being unjustly charged.
The scene at the coroner's too, I just love, because I don't know, it's just a great scene of just these obviously two. Gillespie's interesting because you don't know you don't quite know where he stands. He's very hard to peg down. Right. You're like, wait, are you racist? Are you not? Are you somewhere in the middle? Like where do you stand? Where these other two guys in the coroner's office are just out and out Southern redneck racists.
And there's a lot of out and out.
Yeah.
I mean, you can do a drinking game to how many times Virgil Tibbs gets called boy. I mean, in the first 10 minutes of the film, I think he's called boy on average once a minute. And if he wasn't called boy, his name was made fun of. You know, we're not going to have any trouble with you, Virgil. You know, that thing. So I feel that with Gillespie, he's recognizing that times are starting to change. You know, when they make that reference, like the sheriff before you would have shot him,
right,
and said it was self-defense. So, and we know that the town doesn't like him.
Right.
You know, he talks about that the town doesn't particularly like him as their sheriff. So maybe the town is not changing as quickly as he is. That scene that they have in Gillespie's house, where he
such a great scene.
Yeah, such a great scene where they talk about being alone and lonely, but it just hits too much of a raw nerve.
He feels too vulnerable, and it's actually in what could have been a scene of them becoming greater friends. He rejects him, but Virgil's too smart to know to miss that that's what's going on.
Right.
He totally gets it, and it's oh man.
That's why they're, again, those performances. It's like I'm not going to give you I'm not going to have that soft moment where everything is just okay and like a flip of a switch. There's just so many subtle moments between them, and I love, I always love in movies, especially around this time, where to have an intimate moment like that where two people just sit down and talk, and to just shoot it so simply. I'm always going to be a sucker for.
I mean, it's almost like the scene in On the Waterfront with Steiger and Brando just in the backseat of the car. Just two brothers talking. They're talking to each other.
Talking to each other.
Right.
The scene in the coroner's office, I was going to say that it reminded me of the scene in Jaws when Richard Dreyfuss is doing the autopsy on the body, and it's just that same thing of like, in a very economical way, we're showing how much he knows, how he's so good at his job.
And that has an impression on Gillespie.
Right.
I mean, it's just like
I need you. I need this information, and there's a little moment where it's like I now have newfound respect because I see what you can bring to this case.
And the importance of solving the case to the town, because the town doesn't want to lose this factory. And when Gillespie's talking to Mr. Tibbs, he's saying that they're going to employ 1,000 people and half of them will be colored. appealing
Yeah.
to them that,
Yeah.
do you care
Yeah.
about
Is that the
them?
scene when Tibbs is about to leave?
He's
on the
about to
train- on the
leave.
train
he's
platform,
getting ready.
right?
He's on the train
Yeah,
platform.
that's a great scene too,
Yeah.
because Gillespie he can't let him go, and he's like, "What do I need to do here?" And it's just
Because they've been humiliated by their stumbling, grabbing him, grabbing Harvey.
In fact, the Gillespie is sort of kind of the ineptitude of his department is sort of revealed to him by Virgil showing up. He sort of looks at his like cronies and he's like, wait a minute, like we are not like this. I am not surrounded by from the guy who lies about fixing the
air
it's just
conditioner and the gate.
yeah, it's he learns a lot throughout the course of the film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he doesn't want to be, and the businessmen in the town make it very clear that he's going to be the sacrificial lamb.
Yep.
They've made that very clear. They're like, if Virgil does solve it, hey, you get the credit. He can't get the credit.
Right,
He's
yeah.
going to go back to where he came from.
Yep.
But if he doesn't solve it, that's kind of it for you. They put him on the line, and they make it very obvious that they don't really particularly care about him. He doesn't have their respect, and you can see that hurts him. That really, really hurts him. I thought too, especially when he finds out that Virgil's a cop. He's a police officer. Because all through the movie, I don't know if you notice, Gillespie, in addition to chewing the gum, always says yeah. He says yeah to varying degrees.
And that's one hell of a yeah.
Yeah. And at that point, he brings in Sam Woods, and he said, "Did you interview him?"
Right.
He's like, "Nope."
Yeah. Oh.
You didn't interview him. Look at this, and it's the
Yeah.
police badge.
Yeah.
Sam's looking at the police badge, and
Yeah.
Leslie's like, "Yeah, oh yeah," and that he really emphasizes it there. But he says yeah all through the movie, and what I thought at the end of the movie was Virgil's giving him a kind of homage to that, because Gillespie says to him, you take care now. And Tip says,
Does he say
yeah.
What? I feel like it has to. There's
I
no
always
way. If you've
felt it was like
noticed
an
that
homage.
pattern of Gillespie saying that
yeah.
throughout,
He says it throughout, and then
wow.
And I was just like, oh.
That's like really poignant. Like I don't know. That's just like a beautiful way to kind of.
I thought it was,
Send the
and I
film
was
on its
like,
way.
that is on purpose.
Wow.
That has got to be on purpose, because he does. If you go back and watch,
Yeah.
at the display of the police badge, it's loud, it's forceful.
Yeah.
But between like the chomping of the gum, it's like he does it a lot.
Steiger's someone who later in his career, I feel like, would be accused of kind of chewing scenery and going big and a lot of times too much and stuff. But I feel like in this, it's just so well controlled. You can see it beneath the surface, and it erupts out of him rather than him making the choice to do it. It really is a controlled, sustained performance, I thought.
To the point where I was noticing in the opening scene, in his opening scene, where the gum chewing, it's rhythmic, and it's like, and the lines that he says, it's like, when does he not chomp on it? When does he? It just felt like I could feel like the rhythms, and like, oh, it's not just him just chewing gum just so he has something to do.
Right.
He's making a complete choice born out of character as to why he has to chomp that gum, and when he chooses not to.
Exactly, because when he gets surprised, it's like all of a sudden he's not chewing, and you notice he's
That's
not
great.
chewing because he's chewing.
Yes.
Chewing.
By creating the pattern, it can create a dramatic moment.
Exactly,
because
because all of a sudden, like, look, the slap.
Right,
it was
right,
like,
right. Oh, the slap is just, it's unbelievable. It's one of the best
It
moments
is
in cinematic history
unbelievable.
because it's just the way, how immediate it happens. Like, it's just like, you feel it in every every part of you. It reaches through
You really did.
from the screen.
You
It's
really
it's
do.
amazing.
And it was literally the slap heard around Black America. Because it broke a
can
taboo.
imagine.
I mean, until then,
Right.
did you have a black man slapping a white man and film and walking away? I mean, there were a lot of quote unquote taboos that it broke. I mean, he's playing a black police officer. He's playing someone who's educated. He's playing someone who's smarter than the white people that
I read
are around
that Haskell Wexler, it was the first major Hollywood film where the cinematographer chose to adjust the lighting to shooting an African American actor. So Haskell Wexler realized that by using the kind of just default lighting that they would just use for white actors and the rest be damned kind of thing, it's like he made the change and was like, no, like you can't see the individual expressions on the actor's face in this lighting, and he adjusted it so that you could, which I feel like it's just another thing of like changing the way black actors are seen and characters are seen in a film. You know?
Yeah, and I think just the work in that scene was just great, just catching everyone's facial expressions, even the butler holding the lemonade. And what he so like
scene.
sometimes I watch that scene and I just look
I feel
at
like
that guy.
Polanski took from this for Chinatown. There's tons of moments there's that scene that feels like Noah Cross sort of feels like Endicott. It's the same feel when you go to that. It's one of those that like I feel like did influence a lot of films, but you don't really realize it. You know, just.
Well, and it's just because it's just solid storytelling, and there's no, like, talking about the slap and talking about, like, there's moments in this movie that even though I had not seen it, I knew about certain moments.
It's like
in the
iconic,
movie,
yeah.
right? So I knew about They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. I knew about the slap, but sometimes when you have moments like those, and then you finally see the movie, they either don't have the same power, or you look at them and you're like, oh, okay, well, that was over and done with. I don't know why it's so iconic. But with this movie, it's like every moment hits you so. Like there were moments where I was watching this movie and I was so wrapped up into it that it's just like there's moments that I felt anger. There's moments where I wanted to cry. There's moments where I felt excited and elated and the feeling that you get when you see a great movie. But the fact that it is such on one hand, you've got this very standard, formulaic, in a good way, Hollywood genre. And then you have this social issue. The genre piece of it makes the social issues not feel so heavy-handed, and then the social issues make the genre elements of it just blow up.
Right. But that was why at the time that scene was so powerful, because of what was going on in this country. I mean, when you think about the marches that were occurring,
that came
the
out
struggle
right
for
at
civil
the time,
rights.
yeah.
Exactly. The Academy Awards in '68 were delayed a couple of weeks because of the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then, of course, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So when you put that film in the middle of all that, and then you have that slap, and then you have Endicott, that actor, I can't remember his name, he was very good in that scene, because he's ready to cry. Because he's like, this
is
way,
all he knows.
This way of life. Because, you know, when they're in the greenhouse and Endicott asked Tibbs, you know, well, what, you know about flowers? What do you like? And you're like, oh, it's interesting that you should like that, because like the Negro,
and then the other shoe drops.
They need nurturing, feeding, and some people don't understand that, and it's like, you know, and then the scene after that, when Gillespie and Tibbs are at the car, and Gillespie's like, you got to get out of town now.
Yeah, at this
Because
point
as
he's
much as
concerned
you
for
need
his safety.
He's actually concerned for his safety. Because they had that whole line, like, you know, I would hang you or whatever. I can't remember exactly what he said.
He said horsewhip you. then Virgil says, "My father used to."
No, that was a different scene.
Yeah.
That was a different
That was at the
scene.
train platform.
Right.
Yes.
Endicott had said
I forget what he
something
says to him in that
about
scene.
killing, and I think Gillespie, knowing Endicott's power in town, would know that Endicott, even though he wouldn't do it himself, would send somebody after him. But Tibbs he still has that adrenaline.
Yes.
I'm gonna bring that fat cat down
Yes.
because now he.
I love the way Poitier says it.
He is now. Oh, and did you notice when he left the greenhouse? There was so much going on in those short few minutes.
Wow.
When he left the greenhouse, the way he looked at Endicott, and he has this adjustment of his body where he doesn't completely back away, but he just shakes it off, like you don't own me, you don't affect me, you don't. It's subtle, but it's there. It's a beautiful move.
I feel like in that scene, Steiger's reaction is so real. You feel like he really respects Tibbs in that moment. Like he's shocked, but at the same time, he doesn't like Endicott. And even though he's kind of towing the line between, he's a product of his environment, he doesn't agree with the way Endicott sees things, and so he's really. The film's beautiful because it's about so many different things, and I feel like one of them just happens to be his character arc. Because I couldn't help seeing it, where I'm like, man, he's really. It's this experience that they're sharing together and learning from each other, and it's beautiful. Yeah. It's really it's a character study as much as it is everything else.
Absolutely. When Endicott says, "What are you going to do about it?" Gillespie's like, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't know. And then if you look at the butler,
I did.
I think they're, even for some of the, I don't want to call them lesser characters or the supporting characters, like Harvey talking in the jail, the conversation that Tibbs and Harvey have, and Harvey just kind of explaining things in his way, just the language that it's written in.
It's Scott Wilson, who just passed away, and I can't believe
that
it
is Scott Wilson. Dude, did not.
Did you know Harry Dean Stanton was in this film?
Yeah, he has
uncredited. I don't even know if he had a line.
Yeah.
Wow, was he
He's one of the officers, and I'm like, wait a minute. If I had known I had to look for a 1967 Harry Dean Stanton, I would have, and I would have been able to find it, but I wasn't. I wasn't prepared.
Well, and he is in Cool Hand Luke too, right? He's in Cool Hand Luke, right?
Is he?
I thought he was with
like he's in everything. It's just one of those characters.
I want to mention something just about Sidney Poitier, because and this is just him in general, and all of the characters that he plays, not just in this movie, but his dignity. And that in that moment, his dignity is shattered, and that's the moment where he blows up and almost loses his poise, and the fact that he is very reserved, and he's intelligent rather than reactionary.
Exactly.
And he's forced into a situation where he has to be reactionary. And then I love the moment at the end when he finally figures out what is going on, and he's like, I was blinded by my own personal issues to see it so clearly.
Because he didn't see it right away, and Gillespie was like, "You just like the rest of us."
Yep.
Because he just suddenly became convinced this is the guy who did.
Yep.
And he did have some evidence to point that way.
Right.
But it certainly wasn't conclusive at that point, and he, from his experience, knew that you can't jump to conclusions that rapidly, especially seeing what they pulled him, they pulled Harvey, they pulled. They were
it was like a musical. Yeah.
So that was also interesting too, because he was just so mad. But the adrenaline, you could just see the adrenaline moving through him after that. And there's just a lot of scenes that, the scene with Harvey in the jail cell, and Harvey, of course, distrusts him, but Tibbs is like, I'm the only friend
But
you
he
got
ends
right
up
now.
giving
I can
he
help
ends
him."
up giving him the clue that
he needs.
right.
He ends
his
up
buddy
having
his
that
buddy
piece
at
of,
the pool hall.
Yep, who had that information.
Yep.
But it's just Harvey, so he can't even think about the basic things like, oh, I've got an alibi. But, they can't even tell the time of death. Tibbs has to explain to them how you do that because they don't know.
Right.
And that scene, they got a murder they don't know what to do with. They need a whipping boy. That scene when he's at the garage. And then he said he was going to find a motel. And the garage owner just laughed at him. Just laughed, honey, we got a guest, It's like, you're not going to find him.
That's a great scene. And those actors are good. See, I feel like not a single character is wasted.
Yes.
There are good actors in every role, and it really makes the whole film feel like a real experience.
I think it does too.
When he's being chased and they corner him, it was one of those. It's a great scene, but it was one of those moments where I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, I know Rod Steiger's going to show up, and I'm trying to think. It's like, oh, how is he going to, what's going to be his way to enter into the scene and stop this? And I remember as it was playing, I'm like, oh, he's just gonna walk up chewing the gum and just with his hands in his pockets. And I don't know why, I just knew that was just gonna be his decision. And I love the way he talks with the men. He's very respectful. He's like, no, you're just gonna get out of here. And then once they taunt him back, and his reaction of punching him.
Is that the only language they understood?
Did you notice the poster behind? No. It says, "Let us all be alert. We don't want anyone hurt," and "anyone" is in capital letters.
Huh.
Wow,
never noticed that.
That is in the garage or in that mechanic shop behind where Steiger is hitting them. I just look up and I'm like, wait a minute.
I've never noticed that. Now I'm going to go back and look at that.
There's another thing in the beginning that I noticed where in the like one of the opening moments of the film, they're at the cafe, and the dog. There's a dog looking in, almost like it's bearing silent witness to the man who's actually the killer. And then that guy kills a fly with a rubber band on a calendar.
The rubber band.
So you know how when they say when you find out someone's a killer, they're like, hey, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Like it literally felt like they were, and then also it's crawling on a calendar, so its days are numbered. I couldn't help but look into all these. I'm like, is all of that relevant? I don't know, but it definitely felt like they were tipping their hand a little bit, like being like, let's see if anyone notices that the killer is killing a fly here in the or that this guy.
That's a good observation. I was more fascinated by the power play because Woods demands respect.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want him to be addressed by his first name. He demands
Right.
respect.
Yeah.
The whole power play over the pie.
And hiding the pie. It's it's honestly one of my favorite parts of the film because it's just such a good bit. It's just such a good that he does this. It establishes. It's great writing because it establishes this very realistic part of a world that you want to make someone believe in your world, and by doing those types of detailed things, it really sells. It really makes you feel.
Yeah,
and there's a moment where there's a moment where he says something offhandedly. It's like, oh, it'd be pretty good to eat one of those if I could. And he's just like, shut up.
Then he lies about the pie later. Like when they asked him, they were retracing the steps of the night, and he actually says he had pie when he didn't have pie, but he felt the need to lie that he had pie when there were other things to lie about, like Dolores Purdy and avoiding that whole scene, but Tibbs knew about her already.
Right.
But yeah, just lying about the pie. The pie was symbolic.
Yes.
It really was. It was symbolic, I thought. I think they also dealt with some other issues. I mean, dealing with the issue of abortion.
Yeah.
We didn't talk about that on film at that time. Not certainly in something that was going to be a major release, and this is his way of finding this criminal because he's starting to realize, okay, she's associated with whoever did this. They've got this money that they stole, and they're going to pay for that abortion. So who does these illegal abortions in these towns?
Right.
You know, and then talking to the woman and her reasons for doing it, and she not wanting to give anybody's name, but at the same time, she's afraid to go to jail. And he talks to her, well, you know, there's white people's jail time and there's black people's jail time. And she's like, you know, don't punish me for wanting better. So that was a great scene as well.
Definitely.
I mean, then when he comes in, he's in the shadows and you don't see him right away. So then he has a lot of, there's a lot of physicality in that role. Like when he's looking and he's always prepared, he's always on his guard. I mean, that the fact of the matter is, black men in our culture, you know, back then, now, you have to be on your guard. And especially when he's first picked up. And he's like, all right, they're bringing me in. Okay, they're going to charge me for murder. You can see how he is just measuring everything, and he is just on guard. And even, and he has to really think about his presence and how does he, like for instance, when he tells the wife her husband's been murdered, Lee Grant character, and he's very matter of fact about it and very blunt with her. And then she, you know, because she's upset, and no one was telling me what's happening. I want to know what's happening. It was like, yeah, your husband's been killed, you know, and she suddenly is going into shock. And they have this just beautiful scene because she is kind of with her
when he reaches out to
arms.
console her,
Right,
that
right.
moment, I
Yeah.
rewound it because I needed to see it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He
'Cause
has
she
his
recoiled.
arms up as
Yeah.
if she might collapse, and he's
Yes.
going to be there
Yes.
to catch her. And so his arms go out, and she just pulls back.
Yeah.
And then he kind of pulls back
His
a little
reaction
bit.
to her pulling back is so amazing.
Right, and then when she does finally kind of collapse and starts to cry, he does put his hands on her, and like her hand touches his hand. Now that's another, like, you want to talk breaking the racial barriers, you know, that this white woman would touch this black man's hand at a time that she needed comfort.
Yeah.
You know, and then she kind of tenses up again from that. But that's an incredible scene. The two of them, that was a beautiful scene.
Yeah,
It's
it
probably
really
one of my
was.
favorite scenes, you know, and just when you look at it, there's a certain ballet about it. And just the like he's there, he's ready, but she's pulling back. And of course, these country bumpkins, she's just like, you all are incompetent.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to pull out this whole project, even though this is something her husband wanted. She's like, you can't find the right killer, and she's responsible for him staying because she insists. She insists to those town businessmen, you want this, you know, factory to still come here. You know, this detective, I want him on this case.
Right.
And I think it's because of that scene that happens, because it's again his dignity and his grace and just coming in and just, I'm not going to BS you. Here's what's going on, and then giving her the time that she needs or whatever she needs to deal with it. And even the great moment where she's just like, can you please just give me a moment? And he does. It's all because of that, because you dealt with that moment the way I needed to have it dealt with, and I can see that you are a smart, wonderful human being.
And a genuine
Yeah.
human being.
Yeah.
I mean, when she gets upset, she's like, what is wrong with you people?
Yeah.
You know, she's just trying to, and in a way, the town businessmen, they kind of put up with her. They kind of put up with her husband because he had the money to invest, and that's what they wanted. I'm not very, you know, I don't think they particularly respected him.
Right.
And you hear, too, when Gillespie is talking to Tibbs, and Tibbs says, he says, whom? And Gillespie's like, oh, you a northern boy.
Yeah.
You know, what you doing out here? You a northern boy. You just, because of the way he spoke. So it's not even a race thing. It's, a North versus South thing, but still
Interesting.
happening. Sure, and the way he's great too, because there's a lot of physicality with Gillespie's character as well.
Yes.
I don't think to the same level, but certainly,
Right.
you know, when he both of them express emotion through their face without speaking. There's so much nonverbal dialogue. You know what I mean? There's a lot of nonverbal dialogue that if people are not paying
Yep.
attention,
I always
they
thought
really
I always
miss.
thought lines were overrated. Like as an actor, I've been in things where I only had like 3 lines, and I've loved it because I got to be in scenes where I didn't have a lot of lines, and you just get to exist, and you get to be. And I love watching actors communicate nonverbally, because it really takes you being grounded in your character, and being able to not rely. I feel like dialogue, you know, it can be beautifully written, but what it accomplishes is telling the story, and it's there to sometimes reveal things about a character's mind state, but you can watch that character exist, and it's definitely on full display in this. You know.
And it speaks to their performances and to the direction of Norman Jewison, that the final moment between them is basically nonverbal. You know, you only get those couple lines, but everything else is just played on their faces.
He one of the things I read once, and it was kind of talking about the various taboos that were addressed in the movie. You know, we talked about the slap, you know, black man slapping the white woman touching the hand. But in the end, Gillespie is carrying the suitcase. And that was another
Definitely.
thing that was considered like the breaking of a taboo. You know, you wouldn't have a white man carrying a black man's, you know, suitcase. That wouldn't happen. Did you ever watch the TV show?
I did growing up because my dad was a fan, and it would be on, and I started to.
The first 2 years were very good. Harold Rollins and Carol O'Connor.
Yep.
And they really played, they continued to address the tension and expanded more on things happening in the town and the relationships between the black residents and the white residents. And then it was like they ran out of steam or felt that they played it out. And then they got another, I think, 2 to 3 years out of it. But it became more procedural.
Right.
I've never seen I don't know if you would call them sequels, but like They Call Me Mr. Tibbs, and then the organization.
I haven't seen
where the character is in. Yeah.
Yeah, I liked They Called Me Mr. Tibbs better than the organization. But I haven't. I mean, I actually can't remember the last time I saw They Called Me Mr. Tibbs. Whereas I watched this a couple of times a year.
It's not Norman Jewison, right? It's different direction. What's that?
Did Sidney Poitier direct both of those, or just?
He did the organization, I thought, right? I think.
I'm not sure.
I couldn't believe it when I looked it up, but so he was in this and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner the same year.
Same year.
And neither film, he's not nominated.
I couldn't believe
He's not
he was
nominated for anything.
When I saw that he was nominated for a Golden Globe and not an Oscar, I couldn't believe that the Oscar snub. It was.
I guess I can. When you look at the history of the Oscars and people of color, it was taking the battles that you were already winning. The fact that he could be a doctor in one movie, and he could be a police officer in another movie, and he could dress well.
That basically the departure from the Hollywood like machine, basically like treating it like there are black characters, like not like that an African American actor can't play any, like, you know, it was that way of thinking that I feel like just had to be
It
broken.
still happens now. I mean, when you take a look at the shock around the success of Black Panther.
Yep.
You know what it took to get that movie made.
Oh, and when you watch Chadwick Boseman's speech, they still played the music to like, and he's just like, don't play the music.
Don't play the music.
Just
like,
allow this moment to happen. What? Yeah.
To say that, and to say that movie wasn't going to play well internationally, and it was huge internationally. To say that movie's not going to play well in Asia, and it played well in Asia. So if you write a good film and you write good roles and you have good actors. You can have success, but there's still this, this split. I think we're coming a long way. I think they're very surprised. So for many, many years, I sold movies. Many, many years, I sold movies. That was how I made my living. And when Tyler Perry started coming out with his films, and people didn't understand his success. Well, Tyler Perry knew his audience. He did the plays. He put these plays on the road. Then he started doing movies from the plays. He knew his audience. And black people wanted to come out and see. I mean, you can laugh all you want about Medea, but Medea says so much through her character. He talks like Spike Lee hates Medea. He really hates those
I'm actually
movies.
a fan of a bunch of Tyler Perry films. I Can Do Battle by Myself. There's there's a bunch of them that I'm really. I think he is able to master the blending of tone of like drama and comedy.
Yes.
Very well.
Very
You don't see
well.
the strings. It's just it's brilliant, honestly.
You
and
don't.
I know there's a
Diary
lot
of
of
Mad
criticism.
Black Woman. There's some very intense scenes in there about a spouse being physically and emotionally abused, and then you have these fun scenes at the family reunion, and it's about family and being supported by family, and it's. So it's. I don't even know how I digressed to that. It took me there.
I just want to. So Spike Lee was on. He was doing an interview with Elvis Mitchell recently, and he brought up. He's like, at one of the award shows. He's like, oh yeah, and I went over and Tyler Perry and I hugged, and Elvis Mitchell was like, you guys hugged? and Spike's like, yeah, we're good. We're good now. But I was just going to say, did you guys see Black Klansman?
Yeah.
I have not yet.
Yeah,
I've been meaning to.
I mean,
I was crying at the end.
Oh
So
my
beautifully
God,
done.
man.
I was crying
Oh my
at the
God.
end. He did really
I can't wait.
beautiful work.
And it the same way that he takes, such a beautiful way that he takes basically a genre piece and mixes it with the social issues and the same thing. Like there's moments in that film that just are like
Exactly, because that's what it is. It's a murder mystery. It's a
That's the
buddy
vehicle. That's the
film.
vehicle that is
Right.
used to just like Get Out.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is like Get Out used the horror genre to communicate a whole lot.
whole lot.
Like that. I watched that for the second time, and I was still like, I need to watch this so many more times
It's
because
stunning.
it's so carefully made.
It is so carefully made, and it took me, I'm almost embarrassed how long it took me to actually watch it, and I finally watched it. I was like, wow. And then, of course, I started picking up all these hip-hop references, because there's all these hip-hop references now, referencing Get Out and The Sunken Place, and shout out to Master Ace and Marco Polo, Pat Bundy, The Sunken Place. But, and then there was something, I can't even remember. Someone was drinking tea, and it's like, oh, I thought all black people stopped drinking tea after Get Out, So and that's how you can tell a really successful movie, because now it's
if it
really
works itself
permanent into culture.
Yes,
Yeah,
pop culture.
It's
Absolutely.
really into pop culture.
Yep.
And I think it's taken a long time to get to where we are, and the fact that, I guess you look at the fact he was getting hired. He was allowed to be a lead. He was allowed to represent Black Americans in a very positive way. He was allowed to be smart. He was allowed to be smarter than the white people around him. That was very, very important. So there weren't the Oscars, but there were the Oscars. There were Oscars being given out for his work, even though he wasn't getting it directly. I'm sure he took pride in that. And I thought the Rob Steiger acceptance speech was really beautiful.
I gotta watch that.
Yeah, no, it's really beautiful, because he really says these beautiful things about working with Sidney Poitier and how much he learned from him. And I think that reference was not only being an actor of his caliber, but learning more, even more from Sidney, but also learning about, hey, this is what's happening in this country. Because at the time, Sidney Poitier, along with, why can't I remember his name, another black actor and singer at the time, very well known, I'll go home, be going to sleep, and suddenly it'll pop in my head, Harry Belafonte. You know, the two of them did a lot of work at the time, you know, with King, with civil rights.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there were those discussions, you know, and especially the compromises made on the film. Like, we can't, there had been issues where Poitier had filmed South before and was threatened by the Klan. So he was like, I want to do this, but I can't go below the Mason-Dixon line. And so that's how they ended up. I think it was in Illinois, but they had to film.
Right, there was a
in the
Sparta,
cotton
Illinois.
scene.
Yeah.
The cotton scene was actually filmed in Tennessee, and they were like, you got to come down to Tennessee.
Right.
You know, they could only find, I think they said there was one hotel that would allow black and white people to stay.
I mean, that is
the
where,
same
yes, this
hotel.
is a work of fiction, but where it transcends the it's going on at the same time that and it's still, you know, so there's
because there was still
things going on.
segregation
Right.
going on at
I
that
mean,
time, yeah.
and that's why, I mean, that's just how, yeah, it just shows how important it was that it, yeah.
You know, they probably referenced the Green Book. And people, and that's why I like that movie, and I still need to see it, but from what I read about it, and people not understanding, oh, the Green Book. And the Green Book still exists in an unofficial way, because I've talked to hip-hop artists who don't like going to certain areas of this country. You know, it's not safe, but having a reference of where you can stay,
Right.
where they will allow black people to stay, where it's safe for you to stay. You know, having to have that reference to go down there and say, okay, if we're going to film in Tennessee, we have to find a place where we can all stay. And we have to find a place where we know our actor's going to be safe.
Would that have been the Defiant ones that would have happened to him? When you,
I don't know. I
Sorry,
don't
when you
know.
said
But
that, I
that
was
was
just
also another, you know, having the black
Yeah,
and
that's right.
writing
Yeah.
together that.
And then
that's
they basically
another
remade
discussion.
that as, I forget what it was, Fled, was it?
Oh, yeah. So unfortunate.
Not quite the same movie.
It was so unfortunate.
why are you destroying the Defiant ones?
Oh, man. I hate when films do that.
I know. They're like, this'll work. It's the same thing. Like, no.
No,
Oh, man.
it's not. It's, yeah, they really stripped a lot of meaning
Yeah.
from that.
Oh, yeah.
Because a lot of it has to do with the times as well.
Right.
And just, remakes. Love them, hate them. Remakes, sequels, reinterpretations. That was difficult.
I'm actually a huge fan of White Men Can't Jump. Like, as a kid, growing up in DC,
That was a fun movie,
I
yeah.
was that I just and like being a fan of hip hop and just like I don't know, it was like I really identified with that film because it was basically like my childhood. Like it just like kind of, I don't know, it dealt with the race issue in a really great way of just like, I don't know, just the story it told and the characters. It felt very real, and it wasn't like pushing. And it was just just like the way it presented itself.
I think it's getting, it shouldn't garner all the attention that it gets, but race and film continues to do so because as a society, we're just not there yet, you know? And I think hopefully eventually we'll get to the point where we just don't study race and class relations, we just study relationships with people. You know, and stories about people. Not that we forget the history. I think it's important to still have films that deal with the historical aspect, but I think the decision makers, the people who have the money, they're short-sighted. You know, it's like the Grammys. You know, women need to step up. Like, why would he say something like that? And certainly, looking at the performances this weekend, and the fact that Childish Gambino won for Welcome to America, but he didn't show up, and he probably didn't show up because he's like, no way are they gonna.
Right.
Yeah, they barely recognize hip hop in the major categories. They're not gonna. I wonder if he knew that he was actually gonna win in those 3 categories if he would have shown up, let alone perform it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of film, videos.
Yeah, that video.
Incredible. But
yeah.
I just, I mean, hearkening back to this film, you know, mentioning looking at things in the background and looking at characters in the background, and there was just so much that either of the characters. And I think, have either of you seen If Beale Street Could Talk?
Not yet. I'm a big James Baldwin fan, so I've read the novel.
I can't. So beautiful. Not a single moment wasted.
I believe it because Moonlight was incredible.
Yeah.
I was a huge fan of that.
And I love soundtracks in movies. You know, going back to Quincy Jones and The Heat of the Night, I love sound. I listen to the way music is used in films and the soundtrack and the way music was filmed. There were all these close-ups of record players. So you'd have the camera in on a record player, and like Nina Simone would start to sing, and then the camera would come back because it's like her voice is now filling the room. It just really, and that just sets a scene. It sets a moment. When you think about the camera on the flies that we were talking about, you know, and the flies on the pie and on the cake, the pie that he's hiding. He won't give up that last piece of pie. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't want to eat that pie with all the flies on it anyway. But, you know, the pie was like a power thing. But just the way the camera would work its way in that dingy diner, and when you know who commits the murder, and then you go back and you watch him in his scenes, and you're like, okay, what tipped us off?
I rewatched Dressed to Kill recently, and that was the same thing where, like, knowing who did it, it was really fun to see all these different, like, clues that were placed throughout the film. Because I feel like a screenwriter and a director, it's just like it's fun for them to, like, I feel like it's a Hitchcock thing of like placing little markers to kind of show people if you could figure it out.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
If you're paying attention.
Like, what's his mentality that caused him to do that?
Right.
You know, what made him so just snap like that?
Right.
And then you can see he's just this.
I mean, your introduction to him is him killing something, you know, literally, like.
and being involved in this power game.
Right.
Where this person who considers themselves to be a superior to him wants to be addressed in a certain way, and he takes offense to that, and then going back to hiding that pie, the whole pie thing is ridiculous. You know, he had another scene, he had the whole pie, never alone like one slice.
And he got
left.
such a kick out of that second scene of hiding that pie.
He sees
you saw him
hide that pie.
It was great. Yeah.
It was, this movie just does so much. It does so much. And then rewatching it again this weekend, just more of those nuances. And I keep going back to the physicality because it said so much. You know, how far can a character go? You know, and that thinking about it as well that goes on in the head, and just the way. Even the other police officers, they start to have some respect for him. You know, they start to
even when they're like
change.
Taking credit for where they're like, yeah, that's what we say. That's what we say. When they're on that line of it, it's out of respect for how smart he is. They're like,
They're starting to learn something.
Yeah.
They're starting to learn something for him, and just the Gillespie, man. Yeah. Go back and count how many times he says, yeah. Be it an adult beverage or a cup of tea, take a sip every time he says,
that's so good.
But it was that, and then the end. I just really also like that they, you know, as we spoke earlier, where they almost had that breakthrough. And then Gillespie just can't fully go there. He just can't fully go there. And then, but just the dark, and I read that a lot of that was improvised. It was like pouring out rain, and they couldn't film anything outside, so they just let them,
Wow.
you know, go at that. And I was like, and I think at that time they're like, okay, we're going to relax into these two characters, and where would they be as men? You know, not
Yeah.
police officers at this point, but as men.
You
Where
got an
would they be?
insight into how lonely Gillespie was too. I feel like you got an insight into his existence.
Because nobody, he said,
When he's
nobody comes here.
when he's not around all his underlings, like he's like, look at him. You
Yeah,
know?
he's like, nobody comes here.
Yeah.
He's like,
right,
nobody
right.
comes here. Yeah, that's what he said.
Wow.
And then he asked him if he'd ever been married, you know, almost. And Tibbs was like, almost, you know. And and Gillespie asked the question. He asked the question about loneliness, and Tibbs was like, well, no more than you. And then, but he didn't like that answer. He didn't like that answer, and he shut down.
Yep.
And he shut down, and I think he saw that they had that together, because Gillespie has a respect for the law. I do believe that. He has it. He's got idiots working for him, but
Yeah.
he does have a respect for the law, and I think he did. There's several times throughout the film, you know, he wants to do the right thing. Like each time he thinks someone did it, he really thinks that they might have done it.
Right.
And he doesn't like.
He just
looking
doesn't have the
foolish.
scope
Right.
of Tibbs. So he sees the one thing, and he does what I guess anyone of his caliber is going to do, and just be like, oh, that's the guy. And like Tibbs
Exactly.
is seeing all the different pieces, so he's playing chess, and Gillespie just that's.
And
you know,
Gillespie's realizing that the men that work for him are idiots.
Right.
You know, the whole thing
Yes.
about the police badge. Did you interview
yeah,
him?
throughout the film, it's
Yeah, he's like,
that
"You didn't
realization.
interview him." Yeah.
You know, I love actually in The Office when the whole tone of the film is set of like the AC is broken. Does that not just like make you subconsciously feel like
yeah.
the heat and just
Exactly.
the mugginess of like Do the Right Thing,
Yeah.
like when the way with the heat wave sets the tone of that whole film and what it's building towards.
You know, when you have Ray Charles singing in the heat of the night, and they go into that dingy diner, and they're both like just.
Oh, you can
wet
just feel
with
the
sweat.
humidity.
They're
Yeah.
just wet with sweat, and people are sweating throughout the whole movie. It's just wet with sweat.
Yeah.
So the heat adds more tension, certainly, to it, because people aren't comfortable.
Right.
Except for Tibbs, is calm, cool, and collected.
know, throughout
in
the
that
whole-
suit.
Yeah.
Through that whole
That's
suit.
true.
He just, you know, he has the jacket off sometimes, but he's always in that shirt and that tie, and probably because he, when you think about traveling, you know, okay, I'm visiting my mom, and then he's on his way back. He's like, no, he's in that suit. He's in that suit because that suit says something about him. And that's a main reason why he's traveling in that suit, and why because he doesn't want people to make assumptions, especially in that part of the country. But they did anyway, because the suit didn't help him because he was black.
Right.
His badge helped him. And then the fact that the guy didn't interview him.
Right.
It's like, and then Gillespie is like, oh, you know. So I think, yeah, Gillespie wanted to do the right thing, but just didn't know how. He was in a play. He was stuck.
Yep.
He was really stuck.
Well, and he's as much of an outsider in his own town, and that they have that's the connection that they share.
Yeah.
That he's not, you know, all the people that he's surrounded by, that he's sickened by it too.
Yeah, and they're not his friends. And they, you know, they play games with him. Didn't I ask you to do that? No, that was my
Oh, and when
brother.
he-
My
yeah,
brother
and he-
works during the day.
and then when he finds out that he's on, and the guy, he doesn't know Gillespie's on the other end of the radio.
he's out there. You better watch your back. He's out there, and then he grabs it. He was just like, didn't I tell you to fix that air conditioner or the gate
and
or
there
whatever?
are moments of humor throughout the film.
Yes.
That's why it really is such a well-rounded film. You can't classify it in any sort of genre, really. It exists kind of outside of that.
Yeah, humor breaks some of the tension. You know.
And I think, you know, kudos to Norman Jewison, because he's not really a director that I often think about.
Right.
Obviously there's Fiddler on the Roof. I love Moonstruck. But there's films that he's done, like Thomas Crown Affair, where I watch it now and I'm like, well, it hasn't really aged well.
Right.
And you would think a film like this would be imprisoned by those same like 60s stylistic choices, but they're not. Like he has such command over all of these disparate elements, and he knows how to just sit back and just let it play.
I think one of the reasons it's aged well is that there are towns like that now.
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually why one of the things I was thinking about while watching it is that this film needs to be watched by people now. Like it is just so important for people to realize that, yes, this is 50 years ago now, but it's like things are still not the way they need to be.
They're not the way they need to be between people.
Yes.
There's economic disparity.
Absolutely.
We have one of the reasons there is such racial tension in certain areas of the country is because there's the stress of economics. You have areas where the unemployment rate is so low, but the jobs that are available to people are not sufficient to really take care of a family, to own cars without being financially stressed. When you have someone who comes in and says, yeah, we're going to bring coal back, instead of saying, well, let's promote jobs in renewable energy, people get bitter, they get upset. And that was really represented in this film, where people they needed that factory.
Right.
They needed that factory. It was going to really mean something for them. It still speaks to a lot of things going on. I mean, there really wasn't any politics in it per se, but certainly the way these businessmen would get together and talk. They run the town. This is what their expectation is. It was very clear that they were setting goals for Gillespie that he went along with, but he didn't like it. But he didn't go along in the same way. They joked about killing Tibbs, and Gillespie didn't participate in that. They almost said, hey, the other guy would have shot him and called it self-defense, as if saying, yeah, you can do that.
Right.
And he's like, no, that's not okay. So, but it just, it's so relevant. It is still so relevant.
Yep. And it's a wonderful movie, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for choosing this movie and giving me the push and the reason I needed to see it.
So go back and count,
And Criterion, that we love so much, just put out this version, and
Nice.
everyone go see it. I can't wait to get into the special features here and delve deep into it. It's wonderful filmmaking, and still, sadly still a relevant issue that we all need to watch. So
Absolutely.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Devon.
Yeah, thank you.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice start to the new season.
Definitely.
All right, thank you for joining us for our season 7 premiere episode, and we'll see you next week. We're going to be doing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. So very excited about that, and very excited about this season. So the list just got released this week, so take a look at it. There's going to be some great discussions and great films coming up. So as always, I'm David Metzger.
I'm Devon Ewald.